Hi everyone, this is Michal from Airhead, and today we'll go through some of the most recent questions from the topic of operational procedures, and more specifically, the general specifications. So let's jump into the first of the 5 questions that we will go through together. So what is the maximum rest period for flight crew after returning to base? So here are just a couple things that need to be remembered. Of course, the maximum, crew duty time for any flight crew is 13 hours per EASA for 2-sector flights. And here, don't forget that depending on how many sectors you do and when you start and finish your duty period, these numbers will change. And for example, if you're finishing within the time of the window of circadian low, then of course your maximum duty period will be decreased depending if you begin or finish at the window of circadian low. And the same goes to the sectors. So if you're flying a 3, 4, 5 sector flights, then your maximum duty period will also be decreased. For the sake of these questions, remember that your rest has to be at least 12 hours when you're returning to your home base, or at least the preceding duty. So if you'll be flying the maximum 13 hours, then you will need to rest for at least 13 hours at home. So this will be at least as long as the preceding duty, or 12 hours, whichever is greater. And here the examiners are trying to trick you with the 10 hours. And the 10 hours is a consideration for when you are outside of your home base. So for example, if you're based in Paris, France, and you're flying to Barcelona, then if you finish your duty in Barcelona, then you'll only need to have by law 10 hours or preceding duty because you're outside of your assigned home base. And also remember that for maximum duty periods, this can be extended by 1 hour by the commander and 1 hour by the operator, and an extra hour if crew augmentation is in place. So now for question number 2. An aircraft is carrying out a hot refueling procedure. What type of fuel is permitted to be used? So of course, in this case, our main consideration is safety. And in case of fuel, and especially hot refueling procedure, we do not want the fuel to ignite uncontrollably outside of an aircraft's engine. So here, the right answer will be Jet A1, as this is the only fuel that has a relatively high flashing point. White cat fuels and avgas, they both have low flash points, meaning they can be quite chaotic and they can quite uncontrollably ignite. Also, they are mainly used for reciprocating engines. This is why they need to be ignited more easily. Jet A1 is the so-called kerosene. In practice, this is just a very clean and hard to burn diesel, meaning that once it starts the reaction, it burns very hot. So remember that for these cases, Jet A1 is the fuel that is permitted for hot refueling. And the other ones, because they also have a lower flash point, they will also have a slightly lower freezing point, so they might be better in colder environments. However, they're definitely not safe for hot refueling procedures. So question number 3. A crew are flying a route which takes them close to the magnetic North Pole and within the Canadian Northern domestic airspace. Which of the following considerations should be made? So remember that always when we see in questions magnetic North Pole and Canada, then you yet need to think high latitudes, which also translates into not very reliable magnetic compasses and navigates that use magnetic directions. So in this case, you always have to remember that the magnetic compass, because your horizontal field strength is decreasing, then the compass will also start being unreliable and will show the magnetic North Pole weaker and weaker. And at the high latitudes, about above 70 degrees, magnetic compass will essentially become unusable for you as a pilot for navigation purposes. And here also something that is worth noting is that remember that VORs can be either tuned for magnetic or true magnetic directions. So you always need to check in the NOTAMs for the navigs that you'll be overflying what exactly they're using. And VORs, they can be tuned to true, especially in those high latitudes, so that you as a pilot can use them efficiently, safety, and that it can actually provide you some value instead of just showing random numbers. Here, it's also worth noting something that you'll remember and is needed for radio nav is that the VORs will always use the magnetic variation at a station, and the Bs will use the magnetic variation at the aircraft. So this also remember here that if you're flying at these high latitudes, the magnetic variation will be changing very, very quickly, meaning the NDBs will be very hard to navigate with properly, because this quickly changing variation will essentially make your tracks very hard to define. And of course, lastly, like we mentioned before, it is the Earth's horizontal field length that is getting weaker, not the vertical. The vertical doesn't really play that much overall in this case. And of course, once you change into inertial navigation, no special procedures are needed. And the full process for EASA for this was that essentially, if the pilots will be flying at these high latitudes, there is no need to increase or introduce an extra part for their duties to decrease the workload in order to keep the operation straightforward and safe. And this will limit the possibility of a confusion within the flight crew. Now for question number 4. So the term decision height is used for. And this is a very interesting question because it digs a bit deeper into flight planning and radio navigation and a lot of things that will become very practical, especially during your flight phases. So of course, the decision height refers to a precision approach. And on the contrary, the MDH, so the minimum descent height, will be for non-precision approaches. Of course, you can also have DA, so decision altitude, and MDA, minimum descent altitude. And these, just as here, DA will also be for precision and MDA will be for non-precision. However, the main difference, which is worth remembering between DA and MDA, is that the DA allows you for decrease in height or altitude, because of course, especially when flying big jets, when you are at the DA and you initiate a go around, you pull full power, start pitching up, but the aircraft will dip slightly below that height. And this is taken into account for MDAs and MDH. This is not taken into account. So when you are flying a continuous descent final, meaning you will be flying a non-precision approach, pretty much like a precision approach, in that case, you need to add a buffer. This will usually be around 50 feet for smaller aircraft, so that when you actually initiate the go around at that slightly higher altitude, you will not bust the MDA or MDH, as this can, of course, risk hitting some kind of obstacles. And also here, remember that the EASA requires us to fly every non-precision approach with a continuous descent final, meaning most likely if you're flying a VOR DME approach, you will be adding this extra margin on top of the MDA. And this is called something called derived decision altitude or derived decision height, used for non-precision approach. However, decision height and approach is something that we use only for approaches such as the ILS or RNP approaches. And for the last question, so within RVSM airspace, if the operator encounters high keeping errors resulting from equipment malfunction or operational issues, which of these discrepancies must be reported? Of course, the reduced vertical separation minimum, this is as airspace where the separation between aircraft is only 1,000 feet, whereas in the normal airspace, vertical separation between two aircraft need to be at least 2,000 feet. And here are a lot of questions asking about RVSM minimas. So remember that in RVSM, if two aircraft are flying in the same direction, the separation is 2,000 because the direction changes with every 1,000. So left, right, left, right. And in non-RVSM, it's 4,000. And of course, this airspace require us to have very precise altitude measuring equipment because of these tight breaks between the two aircraft. This is why it's very important that you're flying with proper equipment and that any errors are reported. And for the reporting, remember that the authority has to be made aware of any issues within 72 hours, like in this case. And the altimetry, and we have two types of errors. So we have altimetry and total vertical error. So of course, here again, the examiners are trying to catch you. You need to remember that the altimetry error that needs to be reported is 245 feet. and the total vertical error that needs to be reported is plus minus 300 feet. And here also remember that the maximum discrepancy between the two altimeters within an aircraft, so between the captain and first officer, can be no more than 75 feet. If it is more than that, then of course you are not allowed to fly within the RVSM airspace, and there are many more other requirements. However, these are the most important ones worth to remember, especially for the exams. And this will be everything for the ops. I hope you found it interesting. I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye-bye.